Richard had the idea several years ago to do some sort of live thing. I have this podcast called Contrabass Conversations, and a few years ago we celebrated our 500th episode right here in this room with Joe Conyers and a bunch of other bass players that were there this year, and I can't believe I did 500 more podcasts since then. It didn't seem like it was that long ago, but this is actually going to be the 1,000th podcast I've done, and I can't think of any. Oh, thank you. Yeah. Thank you. And I can't think of anybody I'd rather spend part of this podcast with than my buddy, the great Chuck Israels. Give him a hand, please. Thank you. And I've had Chuck on the podcast a few times at this point. I think the first time we did it over the phone, maybe 7-8 years ago, and then we were just chatting and visiting. I got to spend time with you in Portland a few times over the year. We took a wonderful trip down to Seth Kimmel's shop in Eugene. So it's been great to really get to know you and spend time. And of course, I've been listening to you my entire life, ever since I discovered music, and my parents have been listening to you, and you've been a part of so many bass players' lives.
You know how strange that feels to be sitting with a guy. I don't look at me and think, I'm twice this guy's age, but I probably am. And to think that I was playing and you were, it's a strange experience, because I still feel kind of like I always did, that I'm learning to make this music.
Well, that's one of the beautiful things about what we do, is that it's something that you can continue to grow and develop. Some similarities to sports, maybe in a few ways, but so many differences too. And like, it's, you know, the more life experience you have and things that you take in, you continue to develop as a composer, as a bassist. And, you know, I think of you as a friend, but then I start to think, let's just remember Chuck's biography. And then I think, wow, you know, what you've done in so many areas of the arts, and you know, for jazz music and with jazz music and all these great artists, and all that you've put out, it's incredible. So I don't even know where I'm humbled to get. I love chatting with you, but it's also it's just a wonderful experience to dig into any topic with you.
Well, I'm glad that I'm fun to be with. I mean, that's an advantage, I guess, not to be a pain in the ass. But I grew up in a musical family. My mother married a classical baritone who was a wonderful musician, and he was politically active. And so in our house, musicians and political people were coming through all the time. Paul Robeson was my kid brother's godfather. That Pete Seeger was in the house all the time. So I was supplied with a childhood background that actually it made me think I wasn't going to be a musician, because all of those people were so well developed and I was a kid, and I'll never be able to do that. But in fact, it did prepare me to be listening to interesting things and to be open-minded to music, and finally deeply affected or infected with it to the point that I went to MIT thinking that was the conventional thing to do, to take advantage of my interest in engineering and mathematics and physics. And then found out that, no, I really didn't belong there. And it took me a while, but anyhow, so that's my background. You know, all these things that you're talking about, a lot of them have to do with the zeitgeist, the cultural atmosphere in which I grew up, and the particular social conditions that put me in contact with things that worked their magic on me to produce a person interested and active in this way. And I see the circumstances of the young people now and they ask me questions about this, and I see they have a lot of advantages that we didn't have in terms of access to the internet and all that stuff that's available. But I also see that it's terribly confusing compared to the time I grew up. I wasn't so confused. There was popular music and jazz, and they were mostly the same thing. There was all this classical music, and I gravitated to this. And everybody was trying to play more or less the same way, and you could make a living playing that way. Now, in order to make a living, if you want to be a jazz musician, you have to do all kinds of other stuff that is in a way antithetical to the aesthetics that attracted me in the first place. Am I talking too much?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Anyway, it's just my experience with here at this base camp with young people who are eager and open-minded and open-hearted and who seem to be attracted and interested in what I do. And they say, well, how do we learn that? Well, in some ways it's a lot harder because they're surrounded with so many distractions. I didn't have that many distractions.
I overheard you chatting with Michael Mannering last night at dinner, and Mike. It was so fun to hear Michael Mannering asking you all sorts of questions about your experiences. And one thing that he asked that I feel I would be remiss if I didn't ask here is, of course, the Bill Evans is a name that. You spent time with him many years, playing with him, and what a great artist. And Michael was asking about that time, and I wish I had a recorder right there just to record, because I think I love hearing you describe that time and what it was like working with Bill Evans. And I think Michael actually asked that, like, what was it like working with Bill Evans? I know you've answered that before.
Yeah,
but...
well, it's a kind of a litany. It comes spouting out, and I've what do you call it? Shameless self-promotion. I wrote a book.
Yes.
It's coming out in the fall.
Oh.
That has a lot of this stuff in it, fairly thoughtfully described, because when you write a book, you better pay attention and get it right. What it was like playing with Bill was easy, and the reason it was easy was because he was so strong. It's easy to be carried by a strong musician. He was, there's a lot about it. There's also the kind of unspoken, consensual, synergistic agreement about how things go. And the best jazz music is, in a way, a model for a synergistic system in which what is good for the individual is good for the group, and what's good for the group is good for the individual. And that's kind of an idealistic Abraham Maslow concept that we aim for that, and it's not easy to achieve it. And our governmental constitution tried to figure that out. I don't know who wrote the jazz constitution. No one person. It's consensual. So when all that consensus comes together, works for everybody, because nobody's the boss, and yet we all kind of agree it's going to go like this or like this, and you got room here, and that's that guy's space. And working with Bill was, to get back to that aspect of it, he was a master of so many things and so comfortable within this kind of big space of how do you make this music work, that you could go this way, or you could lean that way, or you could, and whatever you did, there was a way of accommodating it in that music. I also have to say that I never came into that music thinking about breaking it, or at that time, I wasn't thinking about how am I going to play. I was thinking about how am I going to insert myself into this music. And when I say I was thinking about it, it doesn't mean I was calculating it. That's just how I felt about it and what I was impelled and compelled to do. I wanted to bathe in that lake, you know. So, and Bill, he really made it easy. If I made a mistake, he ignored it. If I did something good, he incorporated it. It was so in that sense, it was very easy. And it was prepared. He was well prepared. It's something maybe that people don't know about that music is how carefully prepared his parts were in such a way that you could find your way to attach an empathetic, coordinating part to that because you knew it was going to go like that, and you knew that if there were to be a change in it, it would be a spontaneous accommodation that would maybe shift something a little bit, but that the overall thrust of the piece was going to, that was how that piece, he had prepared it, made it his. I wanted to be in that. So I loved it. And I've been chasing that goal for the rest of my life, only I've been trying to do it with bigger ensembles and other instrumental colors and occasionally some idea that doesn't spring exactly from that, but I haven't abandoned that aesthetic. It's satisfied me for as long as I can remember.
Describing Bill and his preparation and spending all the time and coming in, but something that I think you mentioned to Michael yesterday is you didn't really rehearse before the gig per se. None. Wow.
And I can't imagine that circumstance now because, again, the cultural climate, the zeitgeist, the l'air du temps, it's different. We played night after night after night after night after night. You got a job, you went to, I don't know, you went to Shelley's Manhole in Los Angeles or the Village Vanguard, and you played a week or two, 6 nights, 2, sometimes 3 sets, and you played the same 15, 20, 25 pieces. We learned them in a kind of an out of the way place in Syracuse, where Bill booked the first week of my joining the trio, sort of to be under the radar, and then we played a bunch of weeks at the Hickory House on 52nd Street, where it was a restaurant, and I don't know, some people paid attention, but it wasn't the same kind of scrutiny that you got at the Village Vanguard. So we just learned the pieces on the bandstand. But his part was solidified all the time. Not the improvisations, but the beginning and how the arch of the improvisations would go is pretty much the same. And then the endings were set. And I had to learn how to join them. And again, I say it wasn't hard because he played so definitively that it made it unambiguous. Mm-hmm. So that's how we worked. And if he would bring in a new piece, he had these 3x5 little music sheets you could buy at Schirmer's, a little 3x5 notebook you could tear out music staves, or maybe there were five staves on the page, and he would write out the chord changes and an occasional bass note to show the direction of the line or a rhythm that was going to happen in that spot. And you'd look at it, and I had to look at them and kind of memorize them quickly, but they were songs. So sometimes I knew the song. Oh, in this spot there's this, the song goes like this, and oh, Bill does this here. And then get up on the stand and play them for the first time in front of people was okay. By the third or fourth night, it was pretty good. And as I say, we played the same things over and over and over, and I don't think any of us ever got tired of them. We shifted a new piece in, and one piece would drop out, so it wasn't. From year to year, the repertoire changed incrementally, but we were always playing music with which we were comfortable and that we knew most of it. So there's nothing so well prepared as a great spontaneous performance. You're really solid, so you can be comfortable and expressive, and I don't know. That's how I remember it. My memory is not perfect, but that's what I think we did.
Well, I remember us chatting fairly recently about, you've gone to so many jazz festivals, and I've seen you at some bass events. I remember catching, I think it was the Ithaca International Society of Bassists Convention, catching a great performance that you did there. But it's great to see you at our bass camp here in San Francisco, and you're known probably as much as a composer as a bassist, but obviously you're a bassist. That's the instrument, and I feel like I got to ask at least one bass question before we wrap up here. And this probably is a 2-hour answer, but maybe we could find a.
I'll do my best.
Okay. I've talked with you a fair bit about like what you're looking for in terms of the sound that a bass draws, and a lot of these people here are probably looking for a bass at some point. Like, what do you look for in the way an instrument responds or sound? Again, probably a very big topic.
Well, it is, but there are certain things that I can talk about that narrow it down. I don't play a bass violin. I play a big bass guitar. That's what jazz bass players play, or at least most of us. So for me, I have to have an instrument that all the notes ring kind of like a piano. They all have to sustain pretty long time in order for me to be able to make it sing, to give it the vocal quality that I like. Now, that said, there are some circumstances and some jazz bass players who like a shorter, more thumpy kind of sound. And sometimes I hear them and think, well, that sounds great. But for me, I need a bass that rings, and that rings on all of the notes. And I could go into great detail about different basses I've had and what works for which ones have worked for me and which ones haven't for one reason or another. And as I was just talking with somebody here a minute ago, I was here in San Francisco at the ISB when it was at San Francisco State, the other side of town, and I was the judge of the pizzicato sound for the 25 luthiers that submitted basses, and they were all set up with what's the name of those bel canto strings, except for one. They all sounded the same to me. I couldn't really tell anything. I picked them up and played the same song on every one of them. They all sounded thumpy, and I felt very unsatisfied and very and frustrated in my inability to do the job I was asked to do. And I picked up Sergio Scaramelli's bass, and it had spirochords on it, and all of a sudden I could play. So that was the winner, but not because it was necessarily the best bass, but. And I understand why people use bel cantos, because they don't vibrate by themselves. They remain subservient to the bow. And the strings that I like, you start them vibrating, and you start them with the bow, and they start to vibrate, and they get away from the bow. And I get that, but my needs are so. I like depth. The bass I have has just enough depth. I've had better ones that have had more depth. I love it when it rumbles my insides. The bass I have now is like a real good bass trombone. It's not. It doesn't have a. I'd like it to have a little more tuba-like quality. But you've played it.
I
You
have.
know what it is.
Yeah.
It actually lets me play, so I'm okay.
Well, I could talk to you all day, Chuck. Thanks for
And
being.
I could talk all day too, but
Appreciate it. Thanks for joining me yet again.
well, thanks for inviting me here. I don't get asked to come to bass things. I get asked to go and bring my music and conduct it, but it's nice to. I like bass players. Thanks.
Great. Appreciate it. Thanks, Chuck. All right, so all three of you have been on my podcast in different configurations. Andres has probably been on the most, and he was, in fact, we did this for the 500th podcast, and Andres was part of that, but this is actually going to go out as my 1,000th podcast.
Okay.
So, and what a great team to celebrate. We just chatted with Chuck Israels, then we have Charles Chandler of the San Francisco Symphony, Amos Yang of the San Francisco Symphony, Andres Martin of the Universe. And what a great opportunity to chat. I've talked with Charles first on the podcast many years ago at this point, and then both Amos and Charles when you released your album. That was like maybe 2021 or something like that. Somewhere kind of around in there. Okay. And I've gotten the chance to hear you play this marvelous composer's music, and we're going to hear some more. And I don't want you to get too cold before you play, so we can just have a quick chat. But maybe tell us about the pieces we're about to hear. And all three of you probably have opinions, so I don't know who wants to start.
Not me.
Well, it's been great to play Andres' music because now this is maybe the pieces you'll hear today are maybe the third and fourth pieces. Like there was the Synchronicity, which was a duo, incredibly virtuosic duo that he wrote for us that we loved working on. And I had a chance, was it just last year or was it 2 years ago
was
now?
last year.
Wow. Time flies. Just last year I was able to do the concerto with Andres there to sort of help give birth to a brand new piece out in the East Coast. And so just to see the evolution, and I'm starting to get a feel for his harmonic language, it's like coming back to an old friend, but there's variety, because he's such a creative composer. There's new aspects of each piece that we work on. So it's a lot of fun.
And as a bass player, what's the bass player writing for another bass player?
It's beautiful, the way Andreas writes, where things are idiosyncratic to the instrument from a player's perspective. It's the best of both possible worlds, getting to play music. And the way that it shows off the depth and the richness of the instrument. And any of you bass players out there, make friends with a cellist, because it's a beautiful match. The blending of the sounds and the way they enhance and support each other, it really works well. And it's great playing with a cellist too, because it just shows you what is possible to stretch for in terms of lyricism and sounds and ideas, imaginations.
Yeah, and just from a practical standpoint, when you do bass and cello, or frankly bass and any string instrument, you have so many more opportunities for performances. You don't have to worry about the setup for the piano. You don't have to worry. I mean, we really can set up shop anywhere. And so that's why any pieces that are written for us, this is a plug for any composers that want to compose, because we always need more repertoire. They get a ton of performances. There's a piece by Shinji Ishima that we love so much that not only did we give birth to, but it gave birth to ballets and choreography. And with Andres' pieces, we're for sure going to perform it a ton. It's going to get a lot of exposure, and we love it because it grows with us in a way that a one-shot performance, like, for example, I loved working on the concerto, but I don't have an orchestra that wants me to play with them every week, or many ever. But so I haven't played it since then. But this piece, since we've put in the work, we've we've put in, I don't know, probably
That number of
10, 15 performances of it, maybe?
wow, that much, maybe so.
Maybe I'm
Yeah.
overestimating,
Yeah,
but it
no,
will
I
get
think
there
so. I think so.
before long. And so that's one of the
Yeah.
best things. If you can find, as Charles said, colleagues that do that, it's just great to get out there and perform.
Andres, I've played your music for two basses. You've written for all kinds of combinations of instruments beyond that, of course. But had you written much for cello and bass before writing for these two?
No, no. Actually, the first piece, it was my first duo for cello and bass. And I also learned a lot by doing it. Somebody asked me during the course of the week about I don't remember exactly the question, but I was saying that I usually try to write and go beyond my own technical skills, and synchronicity is a good proof of that, because I don't know if I can play the bass part, and Charles does magnificently. And the other thing is yesterday I did the solo bass version of Beyond Self. So it's gonna be nice. You're gonna hear it again in the actual version, which I believe is the same piece, but at the same time it's a completely different thing. Wow. And I just can't wait to hear you guys.
Great. We'd like to play one more quick one for you, and it's Tango. Tango time.
Also,
Also by Andreas Martin. I just assumed. Thank you. Hey, hey!
Hi, yeah, this is for Andres Martin. I really loved both of those pieces. I thought they were really awesome. I thought they carried a lot of emotion, and I really liked how the cello complemented the bass. I feel like the bass added a lot of warmth, and the cello added a lot of breath to the pieces. I was wondering what years you composed these pieces.
Well, the first one is from some point last year, and the second one is oldest. Actually, it's a bass duo that I did an arrangement for them, and that one I believe is at least 5 years old. Yeah.
Well, they're really phenomenal
Thank you.
pieces, and they're really good.
So my question is kind of in two parts, but first I wanted to say those were phenomenal. That was amazing. I really enjoyed that. So this is also for you, Andres. When you're composing a piece with two voices, how do you go about coordinating the two voices and then choosing what should be in which voice?
I have no idea. Honestly, I don't know. In this case, with the first piece, I specifically remember I had some ideas with the bass, and for fortunately, I have a cello at home that I can horribly play, but I sat down and I started jamming on top of it, and the idea came out about, because it's the whole piece is, like I said yesterday, it's about going inside of myself, and how can most of the time we have some sort of conversation. So I wanted this to be a conversation, but pretty much with the same stuff, because it's a conversation with yourself. So that's how we came, and I actually, there's not an organized way, at least for me, to do it. And when I did it, I was constantly trying this should be the cello, no, copy paste, and switch the voices. And this works better on the bass, or both. So it was kind of a post-organized chaos.
So I lied. I have one more thing I want to ask, and it's for you two. Both of you brought out the expressions and the emotion in the music so well. Whenever you get a piece, how do you go about interpreting the emotion in it and then playing it?
No, that's a great question. So how do we basically bring the music to life?
Yes.
I think a lot of it actually is, of course, we have to do the nuts and bolts, and that's really fun actually. Like when we first get a piece, any piece, we sort of slam through it, look at the parts that are really tricky, we start putting together. So your learning curve is incredibly fast there. Like when you're first learning a piece, you just make progress like that. Then we start to look more carefully at the subjective. So that's objective. Like the notes that Andres writes, it's non-negotiable. Those are right there. Although we sometimes negotiate. And so the rhythms and what is on the page, that's sort of what we call objective material. So subjective is now, how do we feel when we play that? What do we want the audience to feel? And then actually one of our best friends is the iPad or phone, because then we record ourselves rehearsing, we record ourselves practicing, because you wouldn't go out in public putting on makeup without looking in a mirror, right? Who has done that? Like just gone to town with makeup and not looked at what you look like. So stepping out on stage is, without having recorded yourself, is the equivalent. So I often have students that say, I don't know, I sounded so good in my practice room 5 minutes ago, and then I really don't know what happened between then and now. I'm like, I know exactly what happened. You didn't record yourself, you didn't formalize your practicing, so you have no idea what it feels like to play and have to execute. And it's amazing, just for me, if I press record, it wakes me up in a certain way, because I know I'm gonna listen back to it, and I don't want to be so discouraged. I know I'm gonna be discouraged. I'm never like, oh, nailed it. I never, right? There's always something to work on, and usually it's the opposite. It's like, wow, I have a lot more to work on than I realized. So that's sort of our journey with it. We do a lot of slow playing. We play with drones on our own, so that we're playing in a key area. So everyone plays out of tune, but if you practice with a drone and you're playing in a key, you correct it, and it feels much more organic. But you can tell when people haven't practiced with a drone, because the pitch can get further and further afield, and it's difficult that way. So then we talk to each other, like, we don't necessarily create a story for each piece that we do, but we talk about colors, as if we're painters. And musicians always talk about, can you change the color there? But you might as well say, can you change the emotion there? Can you do that? So that's a little bit how we construct it.
Thank
I might
you.
just add one other thing to that, if I could, just really very briefly, but just in that process too, the piece, the Beyond Self, is so beautifully written in that it answers back and forth so much, especially in the beginning. It's so fun. It's like having a conversation with me and you hear my voice and the passion or the direction that it's going, and then you respond to that. And so I think of playing, getting a chance to do it a number of times helps you to sort of develop this certain ideas about communicating back and forth with it. that makes any sense.
So I have two questions. I'll make them quick. First, for the musicians and Andreas, what was the work process in this piece? Like, was it mostly just, okay, I give you the music, work it out, and then tell me if you have questions? Or was it mostly just like you would meet, or I'm not sure how this works.
Well, in an ideal world, we'd live in the same city, and we'd say, Andres, we've worked on it. Can you come listen to it? Can you give us our feedback? But we don't live in the same place, and it took us a while to get to it. Actually, it's mostly my fault because I was really busy and slow. But finally, we got to it, and we finally sent him a recording of what we did, and then he gave us feedback. So, for example, there's some funny things, like just logistic things. Charles put in, and I put in a couple cadenzas because he doesn't have an iPad, right? So he's doing patients, and sometimes he just didn't have time. So then I would improvise. And in another place, Charles decided I think he needed to improvise also for something else. And then we heard back the bad news that was not good. Right? Actually, we still did a little bit of it now because we don't. And I was joking with Charles. I was saying, of course he's not thrilled with it. It's like a painter sent us something, and we were just like with our crayons. Do you mind if I add this? Because I think it's really cool. Because what you did was awesome, but check this out. So we got that feedback, and even after today.
Not only that was very good feedback too.
but there's fun feedback like that, and that's the wonderful thing about having a living composer, that you always have access to them, and they might change their minds about some things. So in ideal world, we would love for the composer to be there maybe after we've had a little time to live with the piece and to get their feedback. Yeah.
I have a question. Are all the bowings written in at the beginning?
No.
None, or some, or?
Honestly, I don't remember.
You
I mean,
don't write.
the slurs, yes. But
Just-
not the direction of the
slurs.
bow. Yeah,
Or
slurs,
you
yes.
don't know which up or, no, I didn't.
No bowings, yeah.
And do they stay the same, or do they change sometimes?
Oh, for us,
Yeah.
they change often.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Like even today, for example, this was not an ideal scenario. Like, and you have to know that this is often the case. Like, this space is quite dry, right?
Yeah.
And we were just warming up in this little space back there that was booming, and we sounded incredible in that space.
Yeah.
And then we came out here, and you don't have the support of the room, right? But it's a great reminder. You just have to. That's why it's also nice to practice in different acoustics. Don't just practice in your living room and think that's what it's going to sound like later on. It's going to sound much different and most likely more difficult to sort of express yourself in a hall.
Unless it's a great one. Even
Even then, the sheer size of it, most people shrink this way. There's no way around the openness of it. So unless you have a house with a room like this, you can't really produce that. You have to use your imagination, which I think is really important actually in your practice.
My second question is for Andreas. How do you write for specific musicians?
That's interesting. In this case, when I wrote the first work for them, not the first that they played, the first duo, the Synchronicity, I didn't know them. And so I wrote the piece, and in that process, I got to know them and how they play, how they work. We personally met, etc. So this second time, I wrote it knowing it's going to be them. So in many things, that gave me a lot of freedom, creative freedom, because I had a sense that how would they take over? Because once I submit the score, the piece, it doesn't belong to me anymore. It belongs to them. So I know there's a big amount of flexibility because they're going to do things that are new to the piece, that it wasn't on me. So I knew they are very expressive musicians. So that's why, in many ways, that's why this music came to me, because I knew there was a potential in the music and a potential in them to make it even more powerful. In that regard, although I wrote every slur and every phrase in the shape I wanted, I allowed them, I told them, you change anything you want if you need to, or if you feel like, because I knew they were going to do it even better than what I could think. So, but it's very important, because it happened to me working with different musicians, and there are some musicians they actually will play better if they have a very big volume of information available, and some other musicians will feel imprisoned. And the more freedom you gave them, the best. You get the best out of them, because they have more space for adding things. So it's ideal when you know who's going to play it. And it actually plays a part in the creative process, of course.
Wow.
Yeah.
It's an interesting subject about writing music in notation and how limited that communication is and how much it depends on the relationship you have
Yes.
and the accepted communication language.
Yes.
It's a complicated subject.
In that regard, I believe, and you will agree, the process was very different with the first commission on this one, because on the first I sent a very long email with lots of instructions and things I wanted to say, and there was a lot of feedback coming and going. This time I just sent a score, and I knew it was going to be fantastic. And I believe before the first instructions came, I got a recording from them that I already loved. So yeah, so that's how impactful is to know who you write for.
So you said you had some changes to the score. What were some of those specific changes, and why did you change them? Was there performance reasons? Was it like why, basically?
Oh, no. I'm sorry, I think that was for Andres.
I mean, if kind of for everybody, if
Okay.
you know, because
For me, there was a logistical factor. Amos is really awesome with the iPad and his foot control, and it's a challenge. Probably most of all of you guys use it, but getting that foot coordinated with just exactly the right time to not messing up and turning 2 pages. So, and also I have a little trouble with seeing visually, so I do like to use paper. But then in that regard, it's problematic for duets, because the space needs to be filled. Somebody needs to be making music, and it can, in a way, never stop. So there's just no place to. It's so compositionally, for somebody like me that's not using an iPad, then there is some challenges. But we found really cool ways around it. One of them was, for instance, maybe you know this, but we're holding a tremolo. And I ended up using the open D, and turning while I'm tremoloing, and then I'm back here, and then boom, ready to go. So sometimes there's little tricks like that.
Yeah, he has 8 pages and no place to turn. And they had inserted a couple cadenzas to facilitate the turn, but the tension in the music was changing. And I wanted a transition where the tension gets held and transferred to the next section. So that's why I actually requested them to find a way of even changing the score if they need.
Yeah, and then there are some things where, like if I was Yo-Yo Ma, no problem. Like these big leaps, right? But I'm not Yo-Yo Ma.
You're
so,
better than him.
Yeah, that's what I meant. I'm better than him. So, so I rewrote some things where I thought musically didn't lose anything, actually gained strength because I wasn't struggling. So I was actually able to just focus. So same pitches, I left, and it actually builds more powerfully this way. So see, I'm trying to convince him without.
No, I mean, when we work on the cello concerto, that there was a lot of back and forth, there was a lot of editing. I mean, it was a 35-minute piece with pretty much a lot of cello playing. And ultimately, and regarding to your question, like I've been insisting all this week, the notes are only the medium to provide a message. And in my own experience, I always erase like 50% of what I wrote, because sometimes I even find a way that there's an easier and simpler way of delivering the message, and the message is the same. Sometimes it becomes more powerful. So I'm very open to make as many changes as we need in order to get it done better and more clear and more powerful. And most of the time it's taking notes out, not just because of a comfort or a logistical aspect, but most of the ultimate, the last part of any editing in any of my works, it's taking music out because it goes more direct. And sometimes even for the player, it allows them to sing more, or, you know, it's why should I have like a phrase with 16 or 17 notes? Maybe I can say something more powerful with 10. And so, yeah.
My question is for Andreas. So, what was the inspiration between writing for writing the first piece?
Well, the inspiration was a deep work in terms of trying to know in myself, and digging very deep and seeing what exists. Because at least I was living in a very autopilot mode, and I found out that digging inside of myself will brought out things I didn't know they were there, and that allowed me to actually feel richer in many ways. So until then, I didn't have any piece that reflect what I felt in that journey that now has become a lifestyle for me. So I wanted something that was deep and personal, and since I always thought that it's very interesting because the bass and the cello can share a big part of the range of the register, but with different color. And since the beginning, I was very curious about how could I take advantage of this and experiencing sometime playing exactly the same notes in a way that you are not sure which one of them is playing those. And because it brings, I don't know even how to explain it, because it's not a very rational idea, but it was a big part of both pieces. And especially on the other one, it was more like a mirror, where both of them are kind of doing the same material and going over and over and changing. And this was like, okay, I want to see it like two sides of the same person. So that's why it's maybe even more intricate than the other one. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I have one more question. So, with the idea of finding yourself, how did you like put that into a song? How did you, I don't know, build that?
Well, I don't know either. I mean, in this case, I was improvising and recording myself, and I'm not looking, when I'm doing that, I'm not looking into an idea. I'm looking a feeling, a very specific feeling or emotion. So I'm playing or writing, and once I get to that place, I stick with what took me there. So I started feeling some of the same emotions I experienced on that journey, personal journey. I started feeling some of that while I was playing this. So that I decided to stick with this, and I said, this is what I was looking for. Sometimes it comes from here, and I have an idea, and I found some music that I think it reflects that, but it's not as close, as powerful as something that actually makes me vibrate or feel like that. So I don't know if that answers your question.
So I think we need to wrap things up. Guys, that's a really wonderful hour and a really nice, thoughtful set of questions for these guys. Jason, thank you
for hosting this. Andres, Amos, thank you.